John Calipari just had his final post-game show of the season. He said some good things. He said some bad. Overall, it was almost what Big Blue Nation needed to hear.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing John Calipari's post-game show comments, final one of the year. Discuss what he had to say about this season, about the upcoming season, about everything going on with Kentucky basketball. I think he had some good things today, some not very accurate, and overall, it was just almost what this fan base needed to hear. Also going to discuss a transfer portal prospect that Kentucky has reached out to. Will the Wildcats have a chance to snag him? We'll discuss it later on in the show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to make sure that you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can do that with LinkedIn Jobs, and you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. John Calipari almost said the right things about Kentucky basketball, the program, this team that just ended their season, and the future of some kids that he will be coaching later on this year. He almost said all of the right things, but there are a couple of different issues that I took with some of the comments that he did make about certain things that happened this season and things that are going to happen later on, at least things that he expects to happen. Let's start here at the beginning of his post-game show, and he immediately started talking about how Kentucky basketball, it's very clear they had a major flaw in this year's team that just lost to Oakland in the round of 64 of the NCAA tournament, and it was a lack of physicality, most notably on the defensive end of the floor. Cal said that Kentucky needs to get back to grinding. They're not going to change offensively, which we will talk about later on in the show, but defensively, they've got to get back to where they have been in the past. He said, quote, "We've got to get back to where we've been defensively, and with physicality, your defense steadies you." And he talked about how important it was that even whenever the offense wasn't having a blowout game like they've had across various games this season, that the defense still always needed to be there as something that the team could rely on when the offense wasn't necessarily going. He said sometimes you're going to need games where you get really good performances from both in order to win, but you've got to have that defense, you've got to have that edge, and you have to have that physicality. Don't disagree with anything that Cal said there. I think that is the main sticking point of what this fan base has been the most upset about, at least for this specific season, is there are so many different details that we could dive into here as far as rotation, as far as utilization, as far as scouting, which we will discuss later on in the show. But I think the starting point for me, and I think it is for a lot of you as well, this team could not play defense, would not play defense, and they lacked physicality, and that came in their style of play, and it also came in how these players were physically built. As we all know, Kentucky, the big story throughout most of the season until they got all of these guys healthy, 3 7-footers in this rotation, playing at center and power forward for the Kentucky Wildcats. On paper, that is super awesome, but then you start to look at how these kids are built, their frames, and how they went through SEC play. Kentucky simply could not protect the rim with as much efficiency as they have in the past with more physical players. And Cal said he's got to get back to that more old school style Cal and that physicality that he's come to know on that side of the floor. Now, he discussed at various points in the show about whether or not, that involves making changes on the staff, and he didn't answer anything directly. He just says that he evaluates everything at the end of every single season, blah, 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 blah. A lot of it was coach speak about whether or not they're actually going to make any decisions, but at least he acknowledges the fact that something has to change on the defensive end of the floor, and he's going to make an attempt at changing it. He also talked about how Kentucky spends their summers in relation to this physicality, in relation to the defense. He said maybe instead of going to the Bahamas or going to Toronto, maybe they need to spend the summer home grinding and making sure that they are doing everything they can to get these players in the gym and get them physically ready for the season. And I love that. I absolutely do love that. Although some people want to discuss, whether or not the importance of going to the Bahamas and the Global Jam as they did this past season. We can talk about how important that is and how it plays into the start of the season, especially whenever you have younger kids that just simply need more experience playing with each other. I think this past year was a good example of, okay, I would have rather gone to the Global Jam than I would have not. But if you are dealing with a more experienced roster, which is what we'll get to here in a second, then you would probably want to see more development at home instead of going to stay for 3 to 4 weeks, possibly like preparing for going to and then coming out of something like the Global Jam, something like a stretch here in the Bahamas. And we talked there about how it may be more important to do that with to not do that with a more experienced team. And that's something that Cal also discussed. You need to go into the transfer portal and find guys that can make Kentucky older and can make them more physical. He said that almost verbatim. Look into the portal, find a guy or two that makes them older and more physical. And then he started talking about, okay, how do we try and solve that with the transfer portal? Well, first we need to know who's coming back. Does that make us older? Then it's the freshmen coming in. He said, I like this group because there's physicality with the freshmen. And I actually agree to him to some extent. And then you look at the portal and say, who's that guy that will make us older, more physical, and kind of give us that edge? And I do agree with this. I agree that it not only does he acknowledge, hey, maybe we've got some more physical guys coming in this freshman class, but also we know that that's not going to be enough, and we need to solve our complete problem with physicality in the portal. But before we do that, we need to figure out who's coming in and who is returning. Is Z returning? Is Hugo returning? You look at your backcourt. You need somebody there that can give you a little bit of an edge. Who is returning next season? And it will give you a really good idea as to how you shape up heading into this season. And we're going to talk a little bit about the transfer portal, like I mentioned later on in the show. And it's a very interesting philosophy for Kentucky to at least reach out to these kids. I will be fascinated to watch as to whether or not they really do push for some of these transfer portal forwards and centers, because then you really start to get into this freshman class and whether or not maybe some guys decommit, whether some guys move on, because there's not going to be enough room for everybody at the end of the day. So if Kentucky's wanting to go get somebody that's more experienced and more physical in the transfer portal, I say go at it. I think that is good. I think that I agree with Cal there, and I don't disagree with what he was saying for the most part at the beginning of his interview here. He also started talking about the blend between transfer portal, experienced, and these freshmen. He said this after the NCAA tournament, and he harped on it a little bit more here about how in today's environment, you're going to need more experienced players to advance further in the NCAA tournament and to win, as we've been talking about for 2 years here on this show. And he had this quote here. Having this program in today's environment, people are 25, 26, 27. So how do we win with freshmen? I like the combo of both, and we've got to get the right combination of kids. We've got to be more physical, and then he said it again, but on top of that, we've got to see who is going to be here. So that makes me think that, and he also said, I think he said this verbatim, it makes me think that we're going to see some of these early portal entries, right? We're going to see some different guys enter, and that you may say, wow, that guy's really talented. You may need to wait a little bit until this NCAA tournament is done, and you've got answers yourself as to whether or not you're going to bring back players to really go after guys in the transfer portal. Now, that came back to bite Kentucky in the butt last year whenever they missed on some prospects that they probably could have gotten had they gotten quicker answers from their guys that were deciding whether or not to go to the NBA draft or to stay with the Wildcats. But I think for this season, you're going to have, I think, a little bit more clear of an answer because you don't have an Oscar Tshiebwe on this roster that could truly go either way. So we'll see what happens there. I like the fact that he's acknowledging that you have to have a blend, you have to do certain things to have success outside of bringing in a ton of freshmen and trying to make them work, right? But here's the thing. This is not a revolution. This is not some new discovery. This is a coach coming to this conclusion publicly after essentially denying it for the past several seasons. And now he's saying, okay, maybe we try and do something different. And I acknowledge that Oscar Tshiebwe team that was a 2 seed had a lot of veteran pieces on it, but even then, you still had some freshmen, and he liked that blend. But now he's saying maybe we need to get even older than that, and I like that. But it's funny. I had a commenter recently on YouTube literally just backlink a timestamp on a video that I posted almost 2 years ago, and it was talking about these exact same things that Coach Cal was discussing in his interview today about physicality, about depth, about experience, and about how he needs to implement these changes at some point within the next 3 to 5 years, or else he's going to be fired. And I, at that point, was not on the fire Coach Cal train. I was just very critical of how he was managing his rosters relative to some of the other big players in college basketball. And here we are having that exact same conversation again with 2 seasons in the books. So while I do agree with most of what Cal is saying, this is not new. We have been discussing this for a while. You've been talking about it for a really long time alongside your friends and people that you know that are fans. It's frustrating that now we're getting this here towards what I assume to be the end of his career. So let's continue to talk about what Cal said. I've got some interesting things that he said there that I do just flat out disagree with, that are just wrong. Before I get into those things, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Iowa State Cyclones can only be described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves, entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. They have a date with Illinois this Thursday in the Sweet 16, and I think it will be an absolute treat to watch. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. You can shop all of those SUVs over at NissanUSA.com. Again, that is NissanUSA.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, and there's plenty of those 1 seeds still in the field, it is time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. You can just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already or the podcast feed, please go ahead and do so. I saw earlier today that the Locked On Kentucky podcast is now, I think, inside the top 60 nationally in I think football podcasts in America, which is really awesome to see. Although we're talking exclusively basketball right now, as we should. Kind of entertaining that we're there in the top 60 of basketball podcasts in the USA. But really appreciate you guys joining up. If you have not, again, subscribed already, I would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. And we're continuing to talk here about Coach Cal almost saying the right things in his post-game radio show, final one of the season. We'll continue along here. He talked about how we need to get older, physicality, repeated a lot of different things. And then he did something that I think gets lost sometimes whenever we have discussions on the show here, whenever other people online have conversations about this coach and the staff, about taking responsibility for failure. And sometimes you will see Cal throw other people under the bus. It has happened. I'm not throwing that away here. But sometimes I think the internet comes after Cal or other coaches, both college and professional, and claim that they don't take responsibility. But the reality is they have just simply not read the quotes where the coaches, or watched the press conferences where the coaches are fully admitting that everything comes back to them And it is, at the end of the day, their fault. And Cal owned up to some things. Now, he made some excuses. He also made some excuses later on in the show, which we will get to. But he said, and I quote, "I'm the adult in the room. I'm the leader of all this. And you know what? My job is to lead these young people and care about them." He also said that regardless of outside criticism, he's not lived up to his own standard. He said, "I got to get by all of this and start leading again and figure out whether it's the offseason work or the approach or the personnel changes that need to occur in order for him to get back to, again, living up to his own standard." And I want to kind of sit here for a moment and talk about that. Cal, in his post-game radio interview, said that he is not concerned about what anybody else has to say. He also acknowledges the fans should be upset, by the way. But he said he doesn't care about what anybody else has to say about what the standard is. He said he cares about his own personal standard. Cool. So what is that standard? According to what he said in this post-game press conference or interview, whatever it is, he said essentially that the standard for Kentucky is to win national championships and to be more physical, to be significantly better at rebounding, and to continue to have the same offense that they had this past season. So what he is essentially saying is his standard heading into next season is borderline perfect college basketball. Okay, so you want a top 10 offense, and I think Sean Vinzel of Hoops Insight said something similar to this on Twitter. So you want a top 10 offense. You want this team to dominate on the defensive end like they did early on in your tenure. You want to get back to that. You want to get back to rebounding at a more physical level, and you want to get back to winning national championships, or at least getting very, very, very close. So, therefore, in his mind, we have set the standard for next season. If we're going off what he defines as success, we know what the standard is next season. It's borderline national title or bust. That's pretty much what he's saying. Play perfect basketball, almost perfect basketball, according to college standards, and then go and win. Get all the way there. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this a ton this offseason, about just the basics. What defines success as far as winning? How far does Cal need to go in this postseason to make it to where this fan base is okay again? Because according to him, it's pretty much getting to the national championship while playing some really, really, really good basketball. I'm not quite sure if that's going to happen. I think a lot of you would be skeptical of that as well. And I would hate to put all the pressure on these kids that are coming in to fulfill that borderline promise that this is what I expect from these people, and this is what I'm going to do to change to try and achieve that. Okay, well, if you're not getting fired this year, then you have essentially placed yourself in a put up or shut up type of situation where you have to, according to your own standards, play perfect in order for it to be successful. So let's see that happen. I will root for this program. I will continue to support this program and continue to talk about how much I enjoy the different personalities that come through it, the fact that Kentucky is able to provide these opportunities to these young men, and it's so awesome to watch them succeed. Reeves, Dillingham, Shepard, Wagner, Edwards, to get them all see them all succeed in various ways this season. Phenomenal. And I'm so excited to see Fland, Somto, Quaintance, Carter Knox coming in, Travis Perry, who had a great game in his championship just a couple of days ago. I'm so excited to see these guys come in. But if this is the standard that you are going to set out for yourself and you're going to do so publicly, I'll follow that then. Okay. If that's what you expect, let's get some perfection. Don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to fulfill that, but that's what he wants this fan base to hear. He wants to try and buy everybody back in. And this was, and people said this on social media, and I'll just reiterate it here because I thought the same thing listening to it. This sounds like a coach that does not want to leave his job. He is still committed to this university. He's committed to this state. He talked about how awesome it is just to be here, not just at the University of Kentucky, but in the state of Kentucky, to help people and to do all these different cool things and to give people hope and to support them. He does not want to leave. But if the expectation is to completely 180 and to get back to where you were, let's see that. Instead of going through another year where you win 22 to 25 games and you get to the postseason and you're wishy-washy in a couple of different really important areas and you lose a first-round game you were favored to win by double digits. Let's not do that again. Let's go deeper. Let's go further than what you have in the postseason over the past half decade. I think the final thing I want to note here, actually, no, I've got a couple more things I do want to note. Keeping the offense. He said that he still wants to run the same offense that he did this past season. With this personnel coming in, I talked about this recently on the show, with the personnel coming in, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that to a T, but if some players come back from this year's squad, Reed Shepherd, I think that you may be able to accomplish that to a degree that would be satisfactory, not just to you, but to the fan base. I think Kentucky has a chance to still have a good offense next season. Maybe not one of the top 3 of Cal's era, but definitely a really strong one. He also, Cal spoke about not just, needing to be more physical in the future, but needing to do certain things against Oakland. He pointed out that he went back and watched the game, and Oakland was more physical. They were also much older. And he started asking questions on the radio shows. We're trying to decide, do we need to get older? Do they need to be more physical if we get older? What about the freshmen? How physical do they need to be? The returnees, how important is it to get some of those guys back? Like, how do we get this puzzle to fit together in order to be completely, just so much better than where we were in this round of 64 game? Because it was, quite frankly, unacceptable. Continue to talk about how much it hurt him to see this season in the way that it did. He wanted to continue to coach these kids. He wanted to continue to win. And I think that, getting to this point here where you have to acknowledge that the 14 seed was older, was more physical than the University of Kentucky Wildcats. And they did things schematically down the road to beat you. That's embarrassing. To have to say that 2 out of the last 3 seasons where you get beat by a team that is just scrappier than you, that just plays harder, that is more experienced, and they're able to get it done. That's embarrassing. It's not acceptable. And I think he would say that too. I think he would agree with that. This conversation, like I said a little bit ago, between Cal and Tom Leach, who does a phenomenal job, and the fan base, essentially. This is too late. Sure, you're going to have unless Mitch Barnhart fires him by the end of this week, he's probably going to be the coach this season. You're going to get another year to try and churn this around towards the end of your career. You're going to get another chance to do this. But acknowledging where you have gone wrong and now saying, okay, now we're going to make changes. It's coming, I think, 2 years too late. It's coming 2 full years too late. Maybe even longer, according to some of you guys. And so at this point, I'm in a spot where I support Kentucky basketball. And if he is the head coach, so be it. But based on his criteria, we need to see significantly better results. I think he would also agree with that. I think the final thing here I want to talk about as far as the Oakland game. So he mentioned scouting and evaluating teams. I know there was a lot of frustration about how Kentucky played against Oakland zone. It was almost like they had not seen it all season long. And he explained his reasoning for why Kentucky did certain things against the zone and that just guys weren't hitting shots. And you know what? Sometimes that happens fine. Visually, watching them play on the court, it was clear that they were not prepared to execute well. And he said some guys miss shots. You put the ball in the hands of guys that don't take shots this season. You kept it away from your best players. At the very least, force them to take shots because they're capable of making some tough ones. But Cal was asked about if he needs to change how he scouts opponents. He said, and I quote, "We will evaluate how we do it. For the Auburn game, we didn't give them much, and I took the scouting report off the board and said just fight because we didn't want to overwhelm them." I tweeted this out. I'm going to read this verbatim. This is supposed to be the greatest program in college basketball. Kentucky's solution towards the end of the season was to cut down on scouting opponents in the most important time of the season where there is more data and film available than at any other point in the year. That blows my mind more than anything that he said in this interview. They decided to just tell their kids to go out there and just fight. They said, forget the scouting report. The thing that you pay your staffers money to do? Forget that aspect of our program. Just go out there and play pickup ball. Are we serious? There better be some staff changes there where their jobs are actually utilized and are effective, I might add. Final thing about the Oakland game. Cal was talking about how Jack Golke, Jack Golke went off on Kentucky and said said something to the effect of, it wasn't like something that he did normally, and they were more focused on Trey Townsend because whenever Trey Townsend played well, Oakland had a lot of success. Okay, you know what? Fine, he's the leading scorer, whatever. But he said that there was a game where Golke went 1 for 9. So he did not want to focus solely on him. Cal saw games. He said, I saw games, plural, where Jack Golke went 1 of 9 from the floor. I did 2 minutes of research. Jack Golke had 20 games where he shot at least 9 threes. He shot 33% in 4 of them, or less than 33% in 4 of them. He went 1 of 10 one time. He had one game where he made just 1 3. In the 9 games where he shot at least 14 threes, he shot 33% or better in all of them, 40% or better in 5 of them. There was no game where Jack Golke for the Oakland Golden Grizzlies went 1 of 9. There were not multiple games. There was a singular contest where he went 1 for 10. It was just simply incorrect. And by the way, that game was against Michigan State earlier this year. And if you're going to be watching Michigan State film, just going to go ahead and pull this up for the boys right here on KimPom. Let's just go ahead and pull this up. Yeah, so Michigan State currently, after their NCAA tournament loss to North Carolina, 11th in the country in defensive efficiency. Maybe instead of watching Jack Golke shoot 1 for 10, Kentucky should have been watching how Michigan State played some freaking defense. Just a tip. I'm no scout, but let me tell you something. If you're going to be throwing away your scouting boards, somebody like me maybe has a valuable opinion at that point. Because if you have nothing to go off of, the fans will start to contribute things that are more accurate than what you are telling your kids in coming into these games. Sean Venzel could do an excellent job scouting for Kentucky basketball. There are a couple people on KSR staff that could do a good job scouting, that do scouting film. I believe Brandon Ramsey, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's his name, does film breakdowns. If you like, that is so embarrassing for the University of Kentucky Wildcats, their men's basketball team, to be there, well, we're just throwing away scouting reports. We're cutting down on scouting. We're just going to go out there and fight. And yeah, I saw this kid go 1 of 9 in a game one time, or multiple games. So we're going to focus on this other player because we found this trend where if he's successful, they win. And it literally took me 2 minutes to figure out that half of that statement was just objectively wrong. And when you gave that kid more volume, he was efficient. He was more efficient with volume. Did you hear what I said there? In those 9 games where he took at least 14 threes, he shot 33% or better in all of them, and he shot 40% or better in 5 of them. Most of those games, he was hitting 45 to 50%. There was one game where he shot 60, I think it was 66%. He was 10 of 15 in one game. I don't know what else to say there. Cal said some good things. I think that he acknowledges where they go wrong. But he also said some very confusing things, some things that are said a little too late, and then some things that are just flat out wrong. They need more physicality. They need more defense. They need more experience. They're looking at the transfer portal right now. They got a kid out of Rutgers that Kentucky offered coming out of high school that they're currently taking a look at. Let's discuss him. Let's talk about Clifford Omoruyi here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It is not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and they do all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. And hiring is super easy when you have that many quality candidates. It is so easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even faster and more convenient. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe talking here with you. Listen, if you've got thoughts about Coach Cal's postgame show, if you've got thoughts about what he had to say, if you agree, if you disagree, if you are wholeheartedly on the let's give Cal another season, 1 more season, 5 more seasons, if you think he needs to be gone right now, you can leave all of that in the YouTube comments below at Locked On UK on Twitter if you want to go hit me there. So we talked about the whole press conference, talked a little bit about transfers. There is one transfer that Kentucky has reached out to. They offered this kid in high school, Clifford Omoruyi is his name, listed at 6'11", 240 pounds, out of Nigeria. Has a very interesting story how he moved to the U.S. at, I believe, 14 years old, and has been playing for Rutgers for the last 4 seasons. Averaged 10.4 points per game and 8.3 rebounds per contest last season. In his junior year, 13.2 points per game, 9.6 rebounds per game. This past year, though, averaged more blocks in his senior season than he did in his junior. He was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school. He's currently the number 2 overall player and number 2 center in this transfer portal class. According to Adam Finkelstein, director of scouting, this is what he has to say. Clifford Omoruyi was a 4-year player and 3-year starter at Rutgers before putting his name into the transfer portal for his 5th and final season of eligibility. He's a physically dominant big man who stands just shy of 7 feet with long arms and a chiseled frame. He averaged 13, 9, and 2.1 blocks as a junior in 30 minutes per night, but saw those numbers dip slightly to 10, 8, and 2.9 blocks as a senior. Omoruyi's best attribute is his ability to protect the rim. He finished 3rd overall in the country last year in block percentage at 12.72% per KenPom and has been number 1 overall in the country in league play in each of the last 2 years. He balances his shot blocking with an ability to clean the glass, as he has finished inside the top 5 players in the country in defensive rebounding rate in league play in each of the last 2 seasons as well. Offensively, Cliff does the vast majority of his damage in the paint, attempting 84% of his total shots at the rim per pivot analysis. While his hands were a big area of concern in high school, they've made moderate gains in the last 4 years. He's still a lot threat and a big target, rolling off a screen or rim running. He's also a consistent threat on the offensive glass, but less skilled away from the basket. He's a marginal free throw shooter at best, not a floor spacing threat, or an especially reliable decision maker or passer trailing the play. This right here for Kentucky basketball would be a piece. This would not be a leader. This would be a piece, I think, for Kentucky basketball. You mentioned there what Adam Finkelstein had to say about this Rutgers transfer. Physical, chiseled, shot blocker. All things that you go, yep, 6'11", 240 pounds, we'll take that. He when you watch his film, he doesn't look 6'11", just in my opinion, he looks 6'10", 6'9". But regardless, I think he does bring a little bit of aggression to the party here, as far as just a little bit of an enforcer inside of the paint. Now, is he somebody that's going to be as dominant as, say, a Zach Edey or a Colin Castleton in terms of just like the weight that they provide, and Oscar Tshiebwe in terms of the weight that he provided down low? No, but I think he's somewhere in between that and what Kentucky had on their roster this past season. Just being point blank honest with you here about this prospect. I think that he would be somebody that could definitely contribute for Kentucky, but would not be somebody that could necessarily stand out, again, because of his lack of, I guess, tools to operate outside of the paint. I really did like some of the things that he did post-up wise and some of his highlights that I watched over, I believe, on YouTube, just a few different videos breaking down kind of what he's about. Is it the most efficient shot selection that he's taking inside of the paint? Not necessarily, but at least he's hitting them at a decent clip. I'd hate to see that number go down if he came to a place like Kentucky, where pace, I think, is more valued and spacing is a little bit more important. So he's forced to kind of take shots a little bit quicker than he anticipates. So I would not want to see him get worked up in the system that Kentucky runs. But here's the big thing for me, and if you've watched this show for a little bit, you'll probably know where I'm going here. Okay, cool. The man blocks shots. Sweet. So rim protector, maybe. I understand that that's the label you want to give people. And if he's top 3 in the nation in block percentage, cool. He can block shots. He'll average almost 3 a game. But does that mean he is truly a good rim protector? Because what good rim protectors do is, if they are not blocking the shot, they are altering the shot, and they are coming down with rebound. And I'm not saying that happens every single possession. I'm saying that they at least force missed shots if they're not getting a hand on it. You understand what I'm saying? And we've talked about other SEC teams in this conference, right, that have different guys that don't have like extremely high block percentages, or even if they do, they're also holding their opponents to really low field goal percentages, which is what makes their defense stand out from Kentucky's. Sure, Kentucky's got 3 7-footers, and all of them can grab a ball out of the sky because they're 7'2", but can they actually protect the rim when someone wants to body them and back them down, play after play after play? Can they recover and at least affect a shot if somebody's going to drive through them or past them? And Kentucky didn't have an answer for that last season. Somebody like Cliff, I think, could be the answer. Let's take a look at KenPom. Although this is not I think the most detailed metric we could look at. These past 2 seasons, when Omoruyi has really kind of developed into a solid player for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, Rutgers finished top 45 and then number 24 in 2-point field goal percentage. They finished number 32 and number 22 in effective field goal percentage. Omoruyi was one of the most dominant players in Rutgers rotation throughout all of these 2 seasons, utilized on a lot of different possessions. So my assumption is, just based off of that, and just based off of watching him, again, somewhere between the Edeys, the Castletons, the Tshiebwes of the world, he is, I think, more... He would be somebody that could contribute and improve Kentucky from where they were last year. You also have to wonder about how Kentucky would physically develop him. Would they add weight? Would they try and add even more muscle? Would they want him to refine his skills in the paint? Because offensively, if you go and look at this player, and KenPom is a great place to look at how this kid has developed offensively, he's actually regressed over these past few seasons. In 2022, Clifford Omoruyi had an offensive rating of 115.2. In 2023, 104. 2024, 103.8. He has become statistically less efficient. Inside the arc, 3 years ago, shooting 63.5%. 2 years ago, 52.9%. This past season, 51.8%. So maybe if you bring somebody like Clifford in, he would be able to kind of assert himself as that defensive prospect and then try and just simply build more muscle so that he can take more effective shots around the rim. Because some of those baby hooks that he takes, he hits them in the highlights, obviously, but obviously at the same time, he's missing a lot of those shots because he takes so many around the rim. So you kind of want to hone in and kind of perfect that instead of trying to maybe break your game out a little bit. Again, this would be a piece. He's visiting St. John's, I think, sometime soon. He had something to do with the scheduling that kind of threw him off from doing that earlier than now. But Kentucky offered this kid coming out of high school. I'm glad that they reached out to him here. I think he would be a piece that could definitely contribute because if you look at him relative to some of the freshmen that Kentucky's bringing in, if you do bring this guy in, you would then have Quaintance, you would have Somto, and you would have Omoruyi. What happens to Ivasic? What happens to Onyenso? What happens to Bradshaw? Somebody is going to either decommit or enter the transfer portal. You can't have 5 or 6 centers on your roster. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens there. So if you've got any thoughts on it, you can leave it in the comments below. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDahl_ and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.